What's going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 17 of the NFL season, aka it's championship game. So, kudos to you guys that made major championship games. If you guys are still watching this content and you didn't make your championship game, as I've said all season with my starts and sits, I think you can factor this into your daily lineups that you do this weekend, as well as if you're going to bet anybody's overs or unders as well. I'm going to go ahead and dive right into this as I've always done. My quarterback spot. My top start of the week, I'm going to go with Baker Mayfield against the Panthers. Panthers have allowed the fourth most points per game to the quarterback position. Now his last outing, he against the first meeting this season, Baker didn't really light them up. He threw for 235 yards. He had a touchdown and 2 interceptions, but I'm gonna think he's gonna have a better performance than what he did in that first outing, just because the Bucks need to win this game to keep their chances at the playoffs alive heading into the final week of the season. And then when you look at what quarterbacks have done over against the Panthers in their last 4 games, 3 of the quarterbacks have thrown for at least 200 yards, which one of those quarterbacks was Baker Mayfield, and they've given up 7 passing touchdowns in those 4 games. My other start, I'm going to go with the potential highly likely rookie of the year, unless you're in the Brock Bowers camp, which I kind of am. With that being said, I like Jayden Daniels against the Falcons in that Sunday night matchup. The Falcons have allowed the 7th most points per game against the quarterbacks this season, and then in their last 4 games, they have allowed at least 3 quarterbacks to finish within 200 passing yards, and they have also given up 7 passing touchdowns as well. Now, moving into my sits. Now, something I forgot to mention before I started this video, as I've said throughout the playoffs, I do believe you should be playing the players that got you to the championship game. So there might be some players on my sits list, including some of these quarterbacks that you believe got you to your championship game. If you believe that, go ahead and play them. But if you do have a better option to turn to that has a great matchup, I would suggest turning to them. So with that being said, my top sits, I'm going with Jared Goff against the 49ers. The 49ers have allowed the 4th fewest points per game against quarterbacks this season. In their last 4 games, only one quarterback threw over 200 passing yards, and that was Tua, and they've only given up 5 passing touchdowns in those games as well. So I do believe if you play Goff, you're hoping that he gets to 200 yards and throws a pair of touchdowns for you in that Monday night matchup. My other sit, this will be actually a Saturday night game. I'm going to suggest sitting Matthew Stafford against the Cardinals. Cardinals are allowing the 14th fewest points per game against the quarterback position. Now, in their first meeting, now this is way back at the beginning of the season, Stafford threw for 216 passing yards and he had 0 touchdowns in that game. Now, in their last 4 games, there have been 2 quarterbacks to throw for at least 205 passing yards against Arizona. That was Sam Darnold and Geno Smith. So there's a potential that maybe Stafford can at least get you some yards. And what's the bonus too is they have given up 6 passing touchdowns in those games. So kind of like a Goff, if you decide that you're going to play Stafford in that Monday night matchup, you're going to be hoping that he gets you at least 200 yards and a pair of touchdowns. With that being said, moving into this top starts and sits at my running back position, at the running back spot. My top start of the week, I'm going to go with the pair of running backs in Tampa Bay, Bucky Irving and Rachaad White against the Panthers. Panthers have allowed the most points per game against running backs this season. In that first matchup against the Panthers, Bucky Irving had 185 total yards and a touchdown, and Rachaad White had a solid day too, getting 78 total yards. In their last 4 games, they have allowed a 100-yard rusher in each of those games. Now, they've given up a lot of yards, but they have been pretty good at keeping running backs out of the end zone in their last 4 games. They've only given up 3 running back touchdowns, but with all the yardage they've been giving up on the ground, I can see Bucky Irving maybe not repeating 185 total yards, but getting close to 100 yards, and maybe Rachaad White is a sneaky flex play as well. My other top starts, you're going to have to monitor Tony Pollard this week, but I do like Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears against the Jaguars. Now, Pollard got banged up in the matchup against the Colts. He did not practice yesterday. I did not see if they got a practice report in before I recorded this video, so we'll have to see if he returned to practice today and then if he's able to log in a practice tomorrow. Now, if Pollard does get ruled out, I really like Tyjae Spears this week, and he's been getting a lot of play over the last 2 weeks. With that being said, both of them do have a great matchup. Going against the Jaguars defense, who have allowed the second most points per game against running backs this season. In that first matchup, Tony Pollard had 124 total yards. Spears didn't really get many touches, so I don't even have his stats here, but I think he maybe had like 30 total yards in that game. And then you look at the last 4 games, 3 running backs have finished with at least 85 total yards, and they've given up 4 running back touchdowns. So I really like Pollard. I like Spears as a sneaky flex play this weekend if Pollard does suit up. And then if Pollard is ruled out, I think you got a high-end running back 2 option in Spears. My top sits now. Two of these guys maybe got you to this point of the championship game, so you maybe want to leave them in your lineup, which I understand. If you do leave Dowdle or Robinson Jr. in your lineup, I would just temper your expectations that they could have a floor outcome. But if you have a different running back on your bench that you could swap out that has a better matchup, I would consider that. With that being said, Rico Dowdle against the Eagles is my top sit of the week. Eagles have allowed the second fewest points per game against running backs this season. In their last 4 games, only 2 running backs finished over 25 rushing yards, and that was Derrick Henry and Chuba Hubbard. And in those 4 games, they've only given up 1 running back touchdown. So I do feel like if you're going to play Dowdle this weekend, you're going to have to hope he gets to at least 50 rushing yards and finds the end zone for you on Sunday. Another one, I don't like Brian Robinson Jr. against the Falcons. The Falcons have allowed the 4th fewest points per game against running backs this season. In their last 4 games, only 1 running back ran over 35 rushing yards, and that was Aaron Jones. And then they've given up 3 running back touchdowns in those games. So, like Dowdle, I feel like if you play Robinson Jr., you're just hoping he gets you to 50-plus rushing yards and finds a way to get into the end zone on Sunday night. Moving into my top starts and sits at the wide receiver position, my top start of the week, I just got one of the wide receiver names listed here, Jayden Reed against the Vikings, just because I trust him the most out of all of them. But if you wanted to take a dart throw and on a Romeo Doubs or a Dontavian Wicks, I would totally understand that, especially if you're going to do your daily lineups this week. Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks would be a cheaper option. We'll have to see about Christian Watson. He left that Sunday he was kind of banged up, I believe, his hamstring. No, it sounds like he might push the play, but I really don't like to play any players that are banged up on my fantasy lineups. With that being said, Jayden Reed and the rest of that receiving corps for Green Bay, they have a great matchup. The Vikings have allowed the most points per game against wide receivers this season. In their earlier season matchup, Jayden Reed had 7 receptions for 139 yards and a touchdown. And then in their last 4 games, for Minnesota, they have allowed 4 different wide receivers to finish with at least 80 receiving yards, and they've given up 4 wide receiver touchdowns as well. And then in my other top start, feeding off my suggestion of starting Jaden Daniels on Sunday night, I also like his leading wide receiver, Terry McLaurin, against the Falcons. Falcons have allowed the 5th most points per game against wide receivers this season. In their last 4 games, they have allowed 3 different wide receivers to finish with at least 100 receiving yards, and they've given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns. So if I like Daniels, I'm going to like his top receiving option on Sunday. My top sits of the week, I'm going to go with Jameson Williams against the 49ers. The 49ers have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. In their last 4 games, only 1 wide receiver finished over 50 receiving yards, and that was Puka Nacua. Now, if there's going to be a wide receiver for Detroit that finishes over 50 receiving yards, it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I know Jameson came off that big explosion touchdown on Sunday, but I would be hesitant to play him. And then on top of that, them not allowing a lot of receiving yards against the wide receiver position recently, they've only given up 4 wide receiver touchdowns in those games as well. My other sit, if you somehow got to the championship game with Cooper Kupp and he didn't have you a catch in the first round, I'm assuming you maybe had a first round bye with him. I know I end up losing that matchup that he didn't get a catch in that game. With that being said, I would be hesitant to have Cooper Kupp in my lineup this weekend against the Cardinals. Cardinals have allowed the 8th fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. In that first matchup earlier this season, Kupp only had 4 catches for 37 yards. Now, in their last 4 games, Arizona has only allowed 2 different wide receivers to finish over 55 receiving yards, and they happen to be one of the best wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, and then a guy that's really came onto the scene in year 2, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And then in those games, they only given up 4 wide receiver touchdowns. So, Puka Nacua is he's obviously the clear go-to guy that you can trust in LA's passing attack. So if there's a wide receiver I feel like that's going to get over 55 receiving yards and get a touchdown, that's the guy I think it's going to be, which why I would be hesitant to play Cooper Kupp this weekend. Moving into the final segment, my top starts and sits at the tight end position. Now, my top starts this week, these are strictly like streaming options. So if you have a tight end that got you there, I'm not saying play these tight ends over those tight ends. These are more suggestions for if you are a fantasy football manager that has been streaming at tight end all season long to get to the championship game, or if you're going to do daily lineups this weekend. These are 2 names that will be definitely cheaper than a lot of the tight ends out there. With that being said, a sneaky streaming option this week would be Juwan Johnson against the Raiders. Raiders have allowed the 5th most points per game against tight ends this season. In their last 4 games, they have allowed 3 different tight ends to finish with at least 55 receiving yards. Now, they have not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown in their last 4 games, but they've given up 7 tight end touchdowns throughout the season, which is tied for the 4th most allowed in the NFL. And the fact that they haven't given up a tight end touchdown, maybe they are due to give up a tight end touchdown this weekend. My other start, he was a start for me last week. He was my tight end of the week in my waiver wire video on Tuesday. I'm going to go ahead and ride with him again. Chig Okonkwo against the Jaguars. Jaguars have allowed the 6th most points per game against tight ends this season. In their last 4 games, there have been 2 tight ends that finished with at least 60 receiving yards against them. Now, they've only given up 1 tight end touchdown in their last 4 games, but just like the Raiders, they have also given up 7 tight end touchdowns this season, which is tied for the 4th most in the league. Moving into my top sits of the week, I am going to go with Hunter Henry against his former team in the Chargers. This is not really a true revenge game. He's been with the Patriots for, 5 seasons now? So I'm not factoring that in at all. Then when you look at the matchup, it's pretty rough for him. Going against a defense that's allowed the 4th fewest points per game against tight ends this season. In their last 4 games, only 1 tight end has finished over 30 receiving yards, and that is Travis Kelce. And then why I really don't like Hunter Henry this weekend is because the Los Angeles Chargers have only allowed 1 tight end touchdown through the entire season, and we got 2 games left. So that's the biggest reason why I would look to avoid Hunter Henry. Another potential streaming option at times throughout the season, and Aaron Rodgers has been playing a lot of good ball over the past month. You might be wanting to maybe take advantage of that and play Tyler Conklin. I would be hesitant to do that. I do not like Tyler Conklin against the Bills this weekend. They're tied for the 9th fewest points per game allowed against tight ends. In the first matchup when these 2 teams met up, Conklin only had 2 receptions for 10 yards. Now, they have had a little bit of a tight end explosion as of late. In their last 4 games, they have allowed 2 different tight ends to finish with at least 40 receiving yards. That was Sam Laporta and Austin Hooper. But then they have only given up 1 tight end touchdown in their last 4 games. So if you're going to stream a tight end, I would look for Chig Okonkwo or Juwan Johnson over Tyler Conklin. Those are my top starts and sits for the championship weekend, week 17 of this NFL season. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you have not subscribed or followed me on all my social media platforms, please do. You can mainly find me on X. That's where I'm the most active, but I got my YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram as well. And just a reminder for next week's content, there's going to be no waiver wire video because I think all leagues should be wrapped up. But I do know some people do play week 18 championship games, so I will do a start sits video combined with a streamable defense video, which even if your league wrapped up this week with the championship game, as I said today, you can take the start sits and do that in daily lineups, in my opinion, and as well as betting overs and unders. Now, I won't do that next Wednesday because next Wednesday is New Year's Day. There's a lot of college football playoff games, so I'm going to want to enjoy that. So I'll actually get my start sit video out and combined with a streamable defense video for you guys. I'll get that out for you guys next Thursday night. So wish you guys all the best of luck. Hope by the time next Tuesday morning, you're a fantasy football champion. Wish you guys the best of luck. Peace out.